Have you ever wondered how our grandmothers managed to create such amazing meals with so little? Before convenience foods and modern appliances, there was a whole world of kitchen wisdom that's nearly disappeared. Today we're exploring 25 brilliant cooking tricks that hillbilly housewives perfected out of necessity and ingenuity. Let's start with saving bacon grease. That jar sitting by the stove wasn't just clutter, it was liquid gold in the hillbilly kitchen. Every morning when bacon sizzled in the pan, that rendered fat was carefully strained through cheesecloth and stored in a mason jar or a coffee can. This wasn't about being cheap, it was about flavor that modern cooking oils simply can't match. That bacon grease would fry the best eggs you've ever tasted, make green beans sing with smoky richness, and turn a simple pot of soup beans into something transcendent. A tablespoon in cornbread batter created a crust so crispy and flavorful that folks would fight over the corner pieces. During the Depression, when a pound of bacon cost about 25 cents, roughly $5 in today's money, every drop of that grease represented both sustenance and seasoning. Some families kept their grease jar going for years, each batch adding layers of flavor like a culinary time capsule. Homemade biscuits with lard. Before Crisco became a pantry staple in the 1920s, lard was the secret to biscuits so light they practically floated off the plate. Hillbilly housewives knew that cold lard, cut into flour with 2 knives or a fork, created pockets of fat that would steam during baking, producing layers you could peel apart like pages in a book. The process required a gentle touch. Overworking the dough would melt the lard and create hockey pucks instead of clouds. These women kept their lard in the coolest part of the house, often in a spring house or root cellar, ensuring it stayed firm enough to work properly. A good biscuit maker could have a batch ready in 15 minutes flat, timed perfectly with the coffee perking on the wood stove. The leftover biscuits weren't wasted either. They'd be split and toasted for tomorrow's breakfast, or crumbled into milk for a simple dessert. Cooking with molasses. That thick, dark syrup wasn't just for gingerbread cookies at Christmas. Molasses was the working man's sweetener, costing a fraction of white sugar and packing more nutrition to boot. A tablespoon stirred into baked beans gave them that deep, almost mysterious sweetness that modern recipes try to replicate with brown sugar. Hillbilly cooks drizzled it over cornmeal mush, mixed it into apple butter, and used it to glaze ham. The sulfured variety, darker and more robust, went into savory dishes, while the lighter unsulfured molasses sweetened cakes and cookies. During World War II, when sugar was rationed, molasses became even more precious. Families would trade eggs or butter for a gallon jug that might last them through winter. The empty jugs never went to waste either. They became water carriers, storage containers, or even makeshift hot water bottles on cold nights. Using stale bread for pudding. When bread cost precious pennies and every crumb counted, yesterday's loaf became today's dessert. Bread pudding wasn't originally a fancy restaurant dish. It was poverty cuisine, elevated to an art form. Hillbilly housewives would tear stale bread into chunks, soak it in whatever milk or cream they had, beaten eggs if the hens were laying, and a precious sprinkle of sugar. The magic happened when this humble mixture met the heat of the oven, transforming into a custardy comfort that could feed a family of 8. Raisins were a luxury addition, often saved for Sunday dinner. Some families added a sauce made from butter, sugar, and a splash of moonshine or vanilla extract. The best bread puddings came from mixing different types of bread, leftover biscuits, cornbread, and white bread, all contributing their own textures and flavors. Making gravy with drippings. After frying chicken, pork chops, or country ham, that brown goodness stuck to the bottom of the pan was pure flavor waiting to be unlocked. Hillbilly cooks called it fond, though they probably didn't know the French term. They'd pour off most of the grease, leaving just enough to make a roux, then sprinkle in flour and stir like their lives depended on it. The secret was the slow addition of liquid: milk for white gravy, coffee for red-eye gravy, or water if times were really tight. That wooden spoon would scrape up every bit of the crusty deposits, incorporating decades of seasoning from the cast-iron skillet. A properly made gravy could stretch a meal to feed unexpected company or disguise the fact that meat was scarce. Some housewives kept a gravy starter, a bit of concentrated dripping saved in a jar that could jumpstart a gravy when the pan didn't provide enough. Preserving meat with salt. Before electric refrigerators arrived in rural areas in the 1940s and 50s, salt was the difference between eating and starving come February. The process of salt-curing meat was passed down through generations like a sacred ritual. Hams were packed in salt boxes, with the salt changed out every few days to draw out moisture. After weeks of curing, the meat would be smoked in special smokehouses, the smoke from hickory, apple, or cherry wood adding flavor while further preserving the meat. A properly cured ham could hang in the smokehouse for a year or more, developing a complex flavor that modern spiral-cut hams can't touch. Smaller cuts were preserved in brine, a solution so salty that an egg would float in it. This meat might be tough and salty, but soaked overnight and simmered with beans or greens, it provided precious protein through the lean months. Using coffee grounds in cooking. Used coffee grounds weren't garbage. They were a secret ingredient that added depth to countless dishes. A tablespoon mixed into chocolate cake batter intensified the chocolate flavor without making it taste like coffee. Grounds rubbed on meat before roasting created a crust with subtle bitterness that balanced the richness. Some cooks added them to their cast iron when seasoning it, claiming it gave the pan a better non-stick surface. During the Civil War and Depression, when real coffee was scarce, grounds were dried and reused 2 or 3 times, each brewing getting progressively weaker, but still providing that hint of coffee comfort. The truly desperate might even mix used grounds with chicory or roasted grain to stretch their coffee supply further. Canning fruits and vegetables. The pressure canner's distinctive hiss was the soundtrack of late summer in hillbilly households. Women would wake before dawn to pick vegetables in the cool morning air, when sugar content was highest. The kitchen became a production line: washing, blanching, peeling, chopping, filling jars, processing. A good canning day might yield 40 or 50 quarts, each jar representing a meal when snow covered the ground. The timing had to be precise. Too little processing and the food would spoil, too much and it would turn to mush. These women memorized processing times for different altitudes, adjusting by instinct. The satisfying pop of jars, sealing as they cooled, was music to their ears. Come winter, those jewel-toned jars lining the cellar shelves weren't just food. They were security, independence, and pride, making butter from cream. If you had a cow, you had the makings of butter. The cream would be skimmed from the milk and left to ripen slightly, developing the cultures that would give the butter its distinctive tang. The churning itself was often a children's chore, taking anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour of steady rhythm. The butter would suddenly come, the fat globules clumping together, leaving buttermilk behind. This buttermilk was true buttermilk, not the cultured product we buy today. Tangy, thin, and perfect for making the lightest biscuits or cornbread. The butter was washed in cold water, worked with a paddle to remove excess moisture, then salted and pressed into wooden molds carved with flowers or leaves. A pound of butter might take a gallon of cream, making it precious indeed. Some families sold their butter in town, the butter money often being the housewife's only independent income. Creating homemade noodles. Store-bought pasta was city food. In the hills, noodles meant flour, eggs, and elbow grease. The dough was rolled paper thin on a floured board, then left to dry slightly before cutting. Some women used a knife, others had special noodle cutters passed down through the family. The noodles might be used fresh, dropped into boiling chicken broth for the Sunday dinner, or dried completely and stored in cloth bags for later use. During molting season, when eggs were scarce, noodles might be made with just flour and water, relying on vigorous kneading to develop the gluten. These weren't delicate angel hair strands, they were substantial, chewy ribbons that could stand up to long cooking and heavy gravies. Stewing leftover meat. Monday's roast chicken became Tuesday's chicken and dumplings, Wednesday's chicken salad, and Thursday's soup. Not a scrap was wasted. Tough cuts and leftovers were transformed through long, slow cooking, often in a pot that simmered on the back of the stove all day. The addition of vegetables, whatever was in season or stored in the root cellar, stretched the meat further. A handful of barley or rice added substance. These stews were constantly evolving, each day's leftovers adding new dimensions of flavor. Some families had a perpetual stew pot that never fully emptied, just constantly replenished like a culinary phoenix. Using cast iron for everything. That black skillet wasn't just cookware, it was a family heirloom, often wedding gifts that would outlive their recipients. The seasoning on these pans was built up over years, creating a surface so non-stick that eggs would slide around like they were on ice. Cast iron went from stovetop to oven without missing a beat, frying chicken, then baking cornbread in the same pan. The iron itself added trace minerals to food, inadvertently fighting anemia in communities where medical care was scarce. Caring for cast iron was serious business, never soap, just salt and oil, with rules as strict as any religious doctrine. Preserving eggs with water glass. When hens laid heavily in spring but slowed in winter, water glass, sodium silicate, kept eggs fresh for months. The eggs, unwashed to preserve their natural protective coating, were submerged in the solution in large crocks. The silicate sealed the pores in the shells, preventing air and bacteria from entering. Come December, these eggs might not be quite as good as fresh for frying, but they were perfectly fine for baking. The solution could be reused year after year, just topped off as needed. This method was so effective that some families would put up 30 or 40 dozen eggs during peak laying season. Making homemade jellies and jams. When fruit trees produced more than could be eaten fresh, preservation became an art form. The process required precise timing, cooking the fruit and sugar to exactly 220 degrees, or until it sheeted off the spoon. Too little cooking and it wouldn't set, too much and you'd have fruit leather. Pectin might come from apple scraps or citrus peels, carefully saved and dried. The finished jelly, glowing like stained glass in mason jars, represented hours of picking, cleaning, cooking, and skimming. Some women became famous for their particular jellies, elderberry, wild grape, or crabapple, trading jars like currency. Saving vegetable scraps for stock. That bucket by the sink wasn't slop for the pigs, it was tomorrow's soup base. Onion skins gave stock a rich golden color. Celery leaves added depth. Carrot tops, potato peelings, corn cobs. Nothing was wasted. These scraps were simmered slowly, extracting every molecule of flavor and nutrition. The resulting stock was liquid gold, turning simple ingredients into satisfying meals. During the Depression, garbage soup made from scraps might be the only hot meal of the day. Using vinegar to tenderize meat. When the only meat available was tough as boot leather, vinegar was the magic solution. A marinade of vinegar, water, and whatever herbs grew wild would break down tough fibers, turning stringy venison or ancient roosters into something edible. The acid also acted as a preservative, allowing meat to be kept a day or two longer in the days before refrigeration. Some cooks added vinegar directly to the cooking liquid, creating a pot roast so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. Making hash browns from scratch. Frozen hash browns didn't exist, but potatoes were cheap and plentiful. grated on a box grater, squeezed dry in a clean dishcloth, then fried in that precious bacon grease until golden and crispy. The secret was patience. Rushing them meant soggy middles and burnt edges. Properly made hash browns were crispy outside, creamy inside, and substantial enough to be a meal on their own with just an egg on top. Baking in a Dutch oven. Before modern ovens, the Dutch oven was the do-everything pot. Placed directly in coals with more coals piled on the lid, it could bake bread, roast meat, or simmer stew. The heavy cast iron held heat evenly, preventing hot spots that would burn food. Temperature control was an art, counting the coals, knowing just how hot, moderate, or quick meant. A skilled cook could produce a perfect cake in a Dutch oven over a campfire. Cooking with wood ash. Wood ash wasn't just swept out and discarded. Mixed with water and allowed to settle, it created lye water for making hominy from corn. A sprinkle in the garden provided potassium for tomatoes. Some cooks even added a tiny pinch to green vegetables to keep them bright green during cooking, the alkalinity counteracting acids that would turn them gray. Making biscuits with buttermilk. Real buttermilk, the liquid left after churning butter, had just the right acidity to react with baking soda, creating the rise that made biscuits light. The tang also balanced the richness of lard or butter, creating a more complex flavor than sweet milk could provide. These biscuits were mixed quickly, handled gently, and baked hot, 450-degree crisp if the oven would go that high. Using leftover cornbread in dressing. Day-old cornbread wasn't stale. It was the foundation of dressing that could make a holiday meal from the humblest ingredients. Crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions and celery, sage from the garden, and enough broth to hold it together, it became the perfect accompaniment to Sunday chicken. Some families preferred it moist, others liked it crispy on top. Arguments over whether to call it stuffing or dressing could divide families for generations. Simmering bones for soup. After every bit of meat was picked off, bones still had gifts to give. Simmered for hours with a splash of vinegar to draw out minerals, they produced a rich, gelatinous broth that would gel when cooled, proof of its nutrition. This bone broth was medicine as much as food, given to invalids and new mothers. Nothing was added that would cloud it, just bones, water, and time. Preserving summer vegetables by freezing. When freezers finally arrived in rural areas, they revolutionized food preservation. Corn cut from the cob, green beans blanched and bagged, okra sliced and ready for frying. Summer's bounty could be enjoyed year-round. The first generation with freezers often overfilled them, not quite believing this miracle would keep working. Some families shared freezer space, one family keeping the meat, another the vegetables. Using eggshells for multiple purposes. Crushed eggshells went into the garden for calcium, especially around tomato plants, to prevent blossom end rot. Some cooks added crushed shells to coffee grounds, claiming it reduced bitterness. Ground to powder in a mortar and pestle, they became a calcium supplement for pregnant women and children. Even the membrane inside fresh shells had uses, placed on cuts as a natural bandage. Foraging for wild greens. Spring meant poke salad, dandelion greens, and lamb's quarters, free food for those who knew where to look. These wild greens were often more nutritious than cultivated vegetables. Poke required special handling, boiled in 3 changes of water to remove toxins, but prepared properly, it was delicious. Dandelions were best picked before they flowered, when the leaves were tender. These foraging skills meant the difference between surviving and thriving when money was tight or crops failed. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed exploring these 25 forgotten cooking tricks, give it a like and share it with someone who remembers. And don't forget to subscribe.